Fiona David is the Executive Director of Global Research from the Walk Free Foundation. She has nearly 20 years' experience working in modern slavery and migrant smuggling. She draws on her diverse experiences, which includes interviewing smuggled Somali migrants in Djibouti, leading labour audits in the Middle East, working directly with police and prosecutors throughout Southeast Asia, and introducing survivors of human trafficking to prime ministers. She is a lawyer and a criminologist and is the Executive Director of Global Research at the Walk Free Foundation. Her role includes leading research on modern slavery in over 167 countries, including for the Slavery Index, a publication that has been endorsed by world leaders, which includes Hillary Clinton, Tony Blair, Mohammed Yunus and Bill Gates, and is used by leading global corporates as part of their risk assessment process. The work of Fiona's team directly informs the work of various initiatives, which includes the Global Freedom Network that was launched on the 2nd of December 2014, so last year, by Pope Francis and the Archbishop of Canterbury at the Vatican. She is a regular commentator in the media, including with the BBC, Reuters and The Guardian. Along with Dr. Anne Gallagher, Fiona is the co-author of the International Law of Migrant Smuggling, and she's also given expert evidence in a number of human trafficking matters in Australia, which, as most of you know, is a growing crime area that we are looking at. And her address tonight is "What does dinner have to do with modern slavery?" So if you could just please welcome Fiona David.
Thank you so much, Mahashini. I am so excited to be here with you tonight, and thank you to the organising committee for such a wonderful dinner. What does slavery have to do with your dinner tonight? Well, I'm happy to say probably very little. Okay, I've inspected the menu. I can see you've got fair trade coffee, well done. You've got Australian prawns, thank God. You've got fish from Australia, thank God. And I see many other wonderful local products. So just to be very clear, I am talking generally tonight, and of course not about this wonderful dinner that we've just shared. I want to start by taking us back to a time when I first started working on this issue. 1993. Who can remember where they were in 1993? Somebody tell me where you were. What was going on? In Japan. Who was the Prime Minister in Japan at the time? Does anybody remember who the Prime Minister was of Australia in 1993? Paul Keating. That's right. What about in the United States? Have we got any Americans here? Clinton? Yep. So 1993, it was a long time ago. Put it this way, in 1993, I was still at uni. We were still at uni. In 1993, Princess Diana, that was the year that she asked her husband, Prince Charles, for a divorce. So these are just some of the many things that happened in 1993. What I want to share with you tonight is a story that has a connection with 1993, but it has only been recently concluded. I did have some slides to show you tonight, but it doesn't seem that the images are working, so I won't... I don't know why. I won't... I'll just talk to the ideas. So in 1993, a young gentleman by the name of Min Nang was an 18-year-old living in rural Myanmar. So Min was the sole breadwinner for his family. His father had died a few years ago, so he had the responsibility to make sure that everybody had food on the table. So of course Myanmar, many people also call it Burma. In 1993, a broker came to his village in Myanmar and offered him $300 for a few months' work. Now, that was an extraordinary amount of money for this young man, so like all good young men, he jumped at the opportunity and off he went on his adventure from Myanmar, first to Thailand, then eventually on a long-haul shipping boat operating in the waters of Indonesia. He ended up operating in a part of Indonesia that's about 650 kilometres off the coast of northern Australia. So to give you some context, I live in Canberra. 650 kilometres would be, I would drive to Melbourne. People from Perth, it might be drive to Geraldton. That's how far north it is of Australia. So really in our backyard. He was put onto a ship for 3 years where he worked for $10 a month. If he didn't make his quota, he would be whipped with stingray tails. His colleagues, if they didn't make their quotas, they would be assaulted. Some of them died. Some of them were sexually assaulted. After 3 years, this young man, who by now was 18 plus 3, he begged the captain to let him go. The captain smacked him on the head with a helmet, and that was the end of the conversation. Fast forward another 8 years' time, this young man, Min, he is still working on a fishing boat off Indonesia, 650 kilometres from Australia. He eventually asked again to leave the boat. The response this time from a different captain was to chain him up to the deck of the boat. After 3 days of no food and water, he was able to find a piece of metal on the deck, and he was able to escape from literally the chains that were holding him to the deck. Until about 6 weeks ago, he was living off fruit and vegetables that he had foraged and grown himself in the forests of this island called Tual. This is an island 650 kilometres north of Australia. So from 1993 to 2015, this man had lived as a slave. What had he been producing? Fish, which is why I'm so excited that we're eating Australian fish tonight. Now, we might think, what does this have to do with us? What does fish caught in Indonesia or Thailand or even Myanmar have to do with us? For the Australians who are here tonight, you may not realise that almost 100% of tinned tuna in Australia comes from Thai suppliers. 100%. If you can find tuna in a supermarket in Australia that is not being supplied by men like Mint, I would be amazed. So next time you open that tin of tuna for your lunch, have a good hard look at where it's coming from and think about what's gone on in the backstory with that. For people from other countries around the world, the United States is the largest importer of seafood products from Thailand. Australia also imports 75% of our frozen prawns from Thailand. So again, Port Lincoln prawns, very good. So that's Mint and the story from Myanmar via Thailand to Indonesia and how it ends up on our dinner plates here in Australia. Now, many of us care very, very deeply about our food. I know I do. When I first started learning about this, I thought, okay, I'll buy Australian made. I'll buy Australian grown food. As I've started to learn more about this, I've really started to realise that we actually have a fairly deep underbelly of exploitation of very low-paid, badly treated, exploited migrant labour here in Australia. Is it slavery? Not necessarily. Some of it is just really bad substandard work. But many of us are criminologists or people who study crime. We know that you create the environment that tolerates that kind of abuse and exploitation, and guess what? That's the breeding ground for more serious forms of crime. Earlier, this year, I was fortunate to receive a briefing from various agencies in Perth about a matter that some of you may be familiar with, involving one of the largest producers of tomatoes in Western Australia. For those of you who are not from Perth, these tomatoes are grown and picked in an area probably about 40 kilometres north of where we are today. The police described the situation they found there as, quote, a human tragedy. There were men, women and children living in 2 houses on the property, no electricity, 1 bathroom in each house, more than 25 people per house. Some of the migrants had stories of just unexplained violence. They had photos on their mobile phones, as many migrants do, of what they've done in their time. They had photos of other people they'd known who had these unexplained injuries. This was in Perth. This case, I'm very glad to say, to the West Australian Police's credit, is being fully prosecuted through the Australian legal system. There's a huge money laundering case going on. This is a multi-million dollar operation. But I think it just shows us that even in our own Australian supply chain, we have to think about these issues. Not just what are we eating, not just is it organic or is it low salt, but what's the labour that's behind the food that we all love. Unfortunately, I could go on with many other examples. I could tell you about happy hens in the UK, where the hens were happy but the people weren't. There was an arrest a few days ago in Ohio. Men on farms were arrested for forcing children to work in poultry farms. About a week ago, our own Fair Work Ombudsman in Australia released a report into Beta Chicken, which produces Steggles and Lilydale. So they supply for McDonald's, Coles, Woolworths, Nando's, Subway chicken brands. Very serious, low-grade worker exploitation going on there. So I don't want to entirely ruin your dinner, so I won't keep going with all these examples. What I really want us to focus about tonight, and really what I really want your minds to be directed to, is what can we take away from all of the other wealth of work that's been done on crime, all of the other wealth of work that's been done on victimology, and apply to this very persistent crime type of forced labour and slavery. We've had wonderful developments in the last 20 years. I was just catching up on the growth of victim support services in Australia in the last decade. How can we apply some of these innovations to the forced labour and slavery space? Well, I think there's 3 groups that need to get involved. The first one is obviously government. Okay, so what can government do about tomatoes? What can government do about fish? It can do a lot. In the United Kingdom recently, the government passed a Modern Slavery Act. It requires companies over a certain size to publish a statement annually about what they're doing to look for forced labour in their supply chains. It's not perfect law, but it's a start. In the United States, if you want to do business with the government, you have to put in place a trafficking risk management plan. Okay, so if you want to contract with the Department of Defence, you have to think about this issue. Where is this concrete coming from? Where is this asphalt being milled and produced? So I think there's some legislative things that we could do at the federal level. There's also some other things we could do through our corporate law. Like, what about directors' duties? If a major supermarket, all of the major supermarkets sell Beta chicken, what's their responsibility? Many of us study corruption. We know that there's been a big push over the last decade to make directors personally responsible for corruption in their business practices. Should they be held personally responsible for forced labour in their supply chains? So government, there's plenty of things to do, and I'm happy to talk further about that with anybody over dessert. Lots of ideas. Business, what can business do? Guess what? Business knows the names and addresses of every supplier they have. What we're seeing at the moment is that many businesses are being willfully blind to what is going on in their supply chains, and they're getting away with it. In the United Kingdom and the United States, where there's legislation on this, we're seeing the big companies like Tesco's, Walmart, Sainsbury's be very active on this issue. They've got fair food programs in place, they've got inspection programs for farms, they've got certification programs. I would love to see something like that start happening in Australia. Which takes me to the final thing that, the final piece in all of this puzzle, and that's us. You know, we're consumers, we buy things, we make decisions about what conference dinners we have or what tea and coffee we buy, what chocolate we buy, what palm oil products we do or don't consume. At the moment in Australia anyway, it's very difficult to know what are the labour standards that sit behind the food you eat. It's very difficult to know if you're eating Thai tuna. It may just say made from local and imported goods. That's something that as consumers we can make noise about. That's something that we can say, look, that's not good enough. If I can know the salt content in my food, I want to know, was the person who picked this food, were they paid properly? So as consumers, I think there's a lot we can do in the fair food space. Finally, I think it's interesting for us too, as we think about technology in this conference. There's been some discussion about technology and crime, technology being used to commit crime, technology being used to solve crime. How can we use technology in this space to be mapping where our food's coming from, who's picking it, what they're being paid? We're starting to see a lot of innovations in this space, and one of my favourite ones at the moment, which I'm happy to share the URL with you, I did have it on the slides, but it's for a crowdfunding website. And what are they crowdfunding for? They're crowdfunding for the fees to get men like Mint home to Myanmar. So literally this crowdfunding platform, it's 6degrees.org, I think is the website. It's very new, it's been up for about a week. They literally have case studies of men like Mint, and you can donate $5 if you want to. People are donating collectively small sums of money so that $1,500 can be raised and men like Mint can go home to his family, which has just happened, by the way. So on that note, thank you for bearing with me on what can be a slightly uncomfortable conversation over dinner. I'm very happy to take any questions, have any further discussion with you. Thank you.